listening to the Chorus One podcast, a show that covers decentralized networks and their impact on the evolution of automated and borderless economies. On this podcast, we invite pioneers and builders to discuss the decentralized protocols and projects they are working on. On this show today, we have Derek Yoo, CEO of PureStake and co-founder of Moonbeam. Moonbeam is a Polkadot parachain designed for developers that combines full Ethereum compatibility with the power of Polkadot. Moonbeam uses another network known as Moonriver to test and verify code under real economic conditions on Kusama. Moonriver won the second ever parachain auction on Kusama just days ago and is now producing blocks. We have Derek on to discuss Moonriver's winning auction on Kusama, the tangibility of community on Polkadot, why some projects choose to deploy on Kusama and not on Polkadot, upcoming plans in store for Moonbeam, plus so much more.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chorus One podcast. Today we have Derek Yoo from Moonbeam and PureStake on. Hi Derek, great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me here.
Sure, yeah, to get started, maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction to the Moonbeam network, to PureStake and yourself.
Sure. Maybe I can start in maybe the reverse order. So just to introduce myself. Derek Yoo, CEO of PureStake. PureStake is the company building the project Moonbeam. So that's kind of the relationship between PureStake and Moonbeam. And just maybe give you a little bit of context, on myself and the rest of the team. We've been building kind of software and technology companies for a long time. Myself, that's probably 25 years at this point. I think we have quite a bit of kind of software building experience from the regular Web 2 world. We're relatively recent, entrants to the Web 3 world. I would say, we started PureStake in the beginning of 2019. So, been at it, 2.5 years now or so. Learned a ton, like in that last 2.5 years. But, I would say that some of our kind of strategies and, kind of how we've, gone about, even executing on our Moonbeam project have come from experiences we had kind of building software companies in just the regular Web 2 space. So I do think that is something that is perhaps, a little bit different about our team. And just to kind of explain, a little bit about Moonbeam, I can give you just, kind of a short version of the story of how we came to the idea and, why we think, it's a good idea. So, our vision is really always been one since we started, working in the space that, we're kind of in this kind of permanently multi-chain situation, and it's going to only become more so over time. And so in this multi-chain environment, our belief is that cross-chain interoperability, that's kind of the key challenge, or that's kind of the key kind of technical challenge to overcome. And so kind of with that context, I think we were, we were led pretty quickly to, protocols that were kind of emphasizing this kind of multi-chain, environment and cross-chain interoperability. And so we ended up working, landing with Polkadot, right? So I think Polkadot, kind of shares this multi-chain vision. It's kind of trying to solve some of these kind of cross-chain interoperability problems like in the protocol itself. So it was a pretty natural fit, and we've been working kind of in this Polkadot ecosystem now for some time. So I think as we started working in that ecosystem, we were building using Substrate, which is this development framework that one uses to build in Polkadot. And I think what we realized is, first of all, it's a very powerful framework. It's, you definitely, I think, versus kind of trying to build a blockchain from scratch. I mean, using a framework like this or, Cosmos SDK would be, it's kind of a no-brainer. That's kind of what one would do these days. So it's very powerful, but I think we realized at the same time, it wouldn't necessarily be a great fit for all use cases or all development teams, right? I mean, the developer teams are kind of used to a lot of them, the Ethereum tech stack and kind of this higher level, kind of more smart contract oriented, kind of platform. So we kind of saw an opportunity there. We said, hey, there's going to be a place for providing that kind of development environment within Polkadot. And so that's what we set out to do with Moonbeam, is to provide this kind of higher level smart contract oriented developer platform in Polkadot. And then, even within that idea, we're kind of focusing on this kind of Ethereum compatible, approach. I think, this starts to tie into like, ways we have looking at things from this old kind of Web 2 world where, it's kind of clear to us that well, first of all, that's like what most people know already. There's like a huge ecosystem of tools and technologies that are already compatible with that tech stack. So it's that was attractive to us in that like we wouldn't need to kind of evangelize a new tech stack. We could kind of leverage a lot of the great work and community and all these developers already have this knowledge. That could become like a kind of a tailwind for us versus needing to kind of try to convince people to do something else. So that approach made sense, and that's what kind of led to Moonbeam, which is kind of this Ethereum implementation, let's call it, like on Polkadot.
I wanted to quickly talk before we go deeper into Moonbeam about PureStake itself. So since we are a staking provider company at Chorus One, right? And I think we initially also met where you were like, I think just like conceptualizing basically Moonbeam and trying to make the decision where to build it on. I think we met at the Substrate conference. It was pretty interesting also for me. Like you asked me basically what is the right choice here, and maybe like for some feedback. It was super interesting, and I was wondering, could you go a little bit into like what you did with PureStake before and kind of how that led to building on Substrate
Yeah.
and making the decision?
Yeah. So also, I'd say that whenever you start in any kind of new, I mean, we had the startup, we were totally convinced of kind of Web3 is the future, and but then you kind of show up on day one, you're like, well, what is it that we do now, right? And so as with any startup, you have to kind of put a bunch of irons in the fire and kind of see what works. And definitely the team, we definitely had a good chunk of the team had this kind of like DevOps and infrastructural background. So the first area we tackled was kind of running, doing like validator services and other kinds of infrastructure service. We actually worked initially, we still continue to provide some services around the Algorand network. That's kind of where we started. I have a connection. My former co-founder is the CEO over there, so we have a kind of connection to that network. And then we started doing it like in the Polkadot networks, with Kusama first, and then ultimately with Polkadot. So we definitely came, that's some of the first things we did was kind of more of this like infrastructure validation, and we've done a lot of that kind of work in the past. So there was some pretty direct like translatability from previous work we've done to kind of this infrastructure work, and I think actually that's shaped actually a lot of the thinking and some of the design choices we've made in Moonbeam. But yeah, I mean ultimately I think what we did decide to do is kind of, I don't know if you want to call it move up the stack, but we kind of, while we're still kind of doing a lot of infrastructure work, obviously our focus is kind of more at this protocol kind of layer now to provide that like software layer. Although I will tell you that like it is pretty infrastructural too. I mean, even just not to go on a tangent, but like even just like being a parachain, it's a pretty complex system, and so even just having all these different environments, being able to test things, test upgrades, other things. I mean, there's a pretty heavy dose of DevOps and infrastructure that's needed, like if you're going to be building these kinds of things. Is I think what we've realized and benefited from as well.
No, for sure. And it's quite funny. We recently had Persistence on a Cosmos chain, and they also started validating and now building their own protocol on Cosmos. And so, yeah, taking it back to Moonbeam now. So this very recent news, you've recently secured the third ever parachain, I believe, on Kusama for Moonriver. So I think for our listeners, this is the first sort of Polkadot-y podcast that we've done since we've come back. Could you just sort of explain how Moonriver might be different to Moonbeam and how they work together?
Yeah, and so I mean, maybe it's even worth it for me to just step back one step from there if some of the listeners may not be as familiar with Polkadot. So I kind of already alluded to the fact that part of the vision of Polkadot is to provide this kind of cross-chain interoperability like natively. So how does it do that? So the structure of Polkadot is that you have this like main like kind of backbone chain. It's called the relay chain. That's kind of like the base chain, and then kind of member blockchains called parachains connect to that relay chain. So you think about it, you have this kind of backbone, and then you have like all these member chains kind of that are attached to it. And then the concept is that you kind of get two main things as a parachain, or as kind of one of these member blockchains in the Polkadot network. You get an element of shared security from this relay chain and the validators on the relay chain. And then you also get an ability to like interoperate or send messages to other chains. And you can do that because you're kind of under this like shared security umbrella, the same kind of security context. So that's kind of the structure of the software. And then, so what what's recently happened here is, so there's Polkadot, and then there's Kusama is kind of this companion network to Polkadot that has the same code. And a lot of things happen there first, right? So like if there's ever going to be kind of a new feature added into the Polkadot ecosystem, look to Kusama. That's where it happens first, and then it kind of gets let's call it like it's proven out there first, and then then and only then is it kind of deployed also to Polkadot. So what's been happening recently is that these kind of parachains are like coming to life now, basically. So we've been working on our parachain for a long time, but it's just now that parachains are becoming like a real thing. Like previously, there's just been this kind of backbone relay chain, and now we have these like parachains coming to life. And so Moonriver is the name of our Kusama deployment, and Moonbeam will be the name of our Polkadot deployment when that happens. And so I think you alluded to it just to give the context that there's kind of this auction mechanism that's used to determine which projects get to occupy the what are ultimately going to be a limited set of slots or capacity that's available on this relay chain. And so I think there's been an initial 5 slots have been made available on Kusama, we were fortunate enough to have won the second of those 5 slots that have become available. So I think that's that's kind of the context there. And just getting back to the question you had is like, what's the difference between the two? So really, we're following this model of having 2 deployments. So Parity themselves, that is the main kind of company building the Polkadot kind of technology. They have this approach of having these 2 networks and having Kusama be this they call it canary net sometimes, a place where stuff gets deployed first, where it gets vetted under real economic conditions, and then only once that's been vetted, you kind of do your Polkadot deployment. We're following the same path where we have 2 deployments now. We'll have 1 deployment to Kusama, 1 deployment to Polkadot, and we'll follow the same same strategy of, hey, when there's when we have a new feature or new anything, we'll deploy that first to Kusama, let it kind of run there successfully before we promote it up to Polkadot. So think of it as like it's the same code base on kind of Moonriver and Moonbeam, but perhaps a different sequence like that software updates will take onto those 2 environments. And that's at least one concept. I think what's happened is that even on Kusama and Polkadot, that maybe even different use cases are migrating to like the different chains. So there definitely are different things that are happening now over time. But that's at least the original idea was that.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, maybe like in the long run, do you expect this to always work like this, or do you think maybe like something will consolidate, will one network shut down? Or do you also expect like any Polkadot project has to take that approach, kind of follow that convention, or is there
No, yeah.
examples that
I would
don't?
say, well, many teams are, but I would say that they're definitely, I mean, I definitely have talked to teams that have said, even, with us, right, to say, hey, like, yeah, great, we're, our Moonriver is great, but like, look, we're just really going to only focus on a Polkadot like deployment. And I think that, one of the key things that come into consideration is that, the economic security like properties are different, right? So, Kusama, while it's not invaluable, I mean, there's quite a bit of value there. It's still a fraction of the value that's like on Polkadot. So if you really are looking for just the highest like security guarantees from an economic perspective, then it may make sense. Your use case, it may be the case that your use case only makes sense on Polkadot. The other dynamic I've seen is that, for teams that want to, these parachains, it does take quite a bit of capital to actually secure one of these slots in this auction mechanism. So for teams that want a full parachain, but maybe don't want to pay the amount that, will be the case on Polkadot, they may target like Kusama as like the final destination, actually, and only deploy to Kusama. We're seeing that for some use cases like NFT, maybe even games where maybe they don't need the economic security, but they want a full parachain, let's say. So yeah, I suspect that like what will happen over time, this is a little bit of my musing, is that you may see different use cases kind of migrate to the different chains depending on their need for economic, kind of their economic security requirements. Let's call it that way.
And you just mentioned before something that is very unique to Polkadot with the auction mechanism. Maybe do you have any insight into how your experience was with the auction, how it went? Do you need to campaign for something like this if you're looking for a parachain slot in Polkadot?
Yeah, there's kind of a couple layers here. So there is this auction mechanism, and again, the reason there's an auction mechanism for becoming a parachain is that it's a scarce resource. So there's there's only so many slots that parachains that can be supported on any given relay chain. So then the idea that Parity came up with was we'll have this auction mechanism such that the teams that are able to kind of demonstrate the largest capital commitments, let's call it, like are the ones that would occupy the slots. And there's actually this bond. So basically you win, you kind of put down the relay chain asset. So in the case of Kusama, that would be KSM. You put that down in a bid, if you win, it gets locked underneath like the parachain, but you actually get it back at the end. So you're kind of just kind of depositing. It's like a deposit, if you will, that you get back. So that's kind of what's just happened now. Now the additional layer like of complexity is, teams like us, well, we didn't have the capital to do this, right? So like we're not like some VC that has like some huge amount of KSM. So there's a separate mechanism called a crowd loan that was introduced, which is a way to basically kind of crowdsource the KSM needed to win like an auction, from your community. So and we ran one of those, or the Moonbeam Foundation, ran one of those basically. And so that, but the cool thing about that is that you kind of get your community involved, right? And like so I think that for me, it was reflecting on from earlier this week, kind of this win. I mean, one of the really cool things for me is just that it is this kind of like expression like of your community, right? To like have these community members kind of help support kind of this like launching of like the network, like in a way. So it's just a cool, it makes it tangible, I've been saying, right? So not only the software's tangible now, there's something producing blocks and these other things, like, but also there's some kind of tangibility to like the community that's built around this like software that, they've kind of expressed themselves like, via this crowd load mechanism.
Yeah, very, very interesting and very unique to Polkadot indeed. And like super exciting to see also, big exchanges like Kraken supporting this. And again, congrats on winning that. So maybe we can get a bit into like the actual tech now. I think, the main thing you already kind of touched upon was the Ethereum compatibility that you want to bring to Polkadot. And I guess one big thing there is your model of the unified accounts. Can you maybe go into a little bit how that helps the Ethereum compatibility, and in general, what your approach is there with Moonbeam?
Yeah, and so one I can tell just kind of a little mini story here to illustrate. So we had this as I was mentioning, we kind of had this idea saying we want to build this kind of higher level developer oriented platform, the smart contract oriented platform. We want to take this Ethereum compatible approach, and so what did we need to do to implement that, right? So there are several of the pieces were already like there. So I mean, obviously we had the substrate framework that Parity was providing as a starting point. And then actually there, Parity had like an EVM implementation, a from scratch Rust-based EVM implementation that was, mainly implemented by one of the core Parity engineers, kind of in a way. So there was several of the pieces already there. What was missing is kind of, an EVM is just this kind of state transition engine. You still need like a lot of other things wrapped around an EVM to make for a full like Ethereum environment, right? You need, like an RPC layer, like these Web3 RPCs. You need, transactions and receipts. There's all these other kind of elements that you need around that. So that's a lot of like what we worked on, is kind of, pulling these kind of like pieces together, like implementing them in Substrate, so that you could have this kind of, this Ethereum like environment that's fully functional in Substrate. Well, a lot of that work has been put into, actually a repository called Frontier that lives under the Parity, repos, and there are a number of other teams that also are like leveraging some of these components at this point. I would say some of the things that are unique though that we did is that you mentioned this unified account. So in Substrate you have you have basically like a default like account scheme like for a Substrate based chain is not Ethereum like. It uses these SR25519 based keys. It uses like an H256 like address format, which looks different. It doesn't have like a 0x address. So one of the first things we realized is we said, we could do something where we tried to have like two different kinds of accounts on the system, where we had like Substrate accounts and we had like Ethereum like accounts. But we realized that was going to lead to like a poor user experience, right? If you kind of had to try to manage and understand two different account schemes and maybe have two different storages and then have some internal transferring between the two, while possible, that was going to be confusing. So we kind of, instead we altered like the underlying like account scheme, like in, our Substrate implementation to be Ethereum like and have Ethereum like keys. So that's like led to like a lot of simplification. I think that's that's how it kind of like, it makes the system behave like you'd expect if you're expecting an Ethereum like system, right? Where you have 0x addresses, you have, you have regular Ethereum keys. That means for MetaMask, you can just like repoint like your MetaMask and things kind of work like as expected, just like, with something like Matic or with BSC these days, right? So that's, I think that's just part of like the strategy. And I'd say in general, it's our kind of the philosophy has been like at every step of the way, like just always maximize for compatibility, right? So we want to just make it like as easy as possible for someone to take an existing Ethereum code base, just like deploy it like onto Moonbeam, and things, there's like a minimum set of changes, right? Like things should just kind of work. And I think we've seen that, there's other, that's been a little bit of the story, I think, of the last like 6 months, where, you've seen like other chains that are taking that same approach, are, kind of getting quite a bit of like activity and traction. So, BSC in particular, and then obviously Polygon, like these days, I guess is where a lot of this is happening.
Yeah, I think that's like something we could probably talk about, like how maybe is Moonbeam, I guess, different? Why is it better to than just like deploying on these BSC Polygon, or what makes Moonbeam like a better choice maybe for Ethereum projects? And I guess also in a way, so far I think many projects that went on these chains are actually often like just forks of something that's on Ethereum, and kind of like completely new projects, not from the same team, and maybe does Moonbeam, seems to me like has a bit more of the approach to bring like the existing projects on Ethereum also kind of cross chain, and make them like be in the Polkadot ecosystem too. Maybe can you talk a little bit about how you imagine that working?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess maybe the first question to pose is like, why like our teams kind of interested in, what's the motivation for? I mean, we have quite a number of teams already kind of committed to deployments with us, and so what is it that motivates them? I think I'll summarize it as two things. One, I mean, a lot of these protocols. So as I said, they're all kind of definitely looking at things in terms of like multi-chain deployment strategies these days. And the underlying motivation, I think, is that they just want, like, particularly in the DeFi era, they want like to increase their users, like their active users, and like in the case of DeFi, like their assets that they're able to serve. And so I think as those users and assets are spread on different chains, then they start looking at these chains and say, okay, well, are there users and assets that I can get to that would grow my protocol or not, right? And so I think that's kind of the underlying motivation, and I think that the thing that we're the net beneficiary of there is obviously we're kind of this let's call it like kind of an easy on ramp to get to Polkadot, right? So Polkadot does have like interesting assets on it. There's the base asset on the relay chain, but there's other teams building projects that have assets, and they actually tend to have a kind of a somewhat unique user base. Like for example, there's like a lot of users that are based in China and kind of in Asia when it comes to Polkadot. So I think for a lot of teams, and they're saying, well, there's an interesting user base, there's an interesting set of assets. How do I get there? And then it kind of goes back to that. Okay, I have a choice. I can build in Substrate to kind of like get there, or I can deploy on top of Moonbeam. I think that we provide kind of an attractive option to people that are already pursuing this EVM deployment strategy of deploying to like other EVM based chains. Then it becomes easy, right? They don't have to re-engineer anything. They kind of take their existing code base and they kind of deploy it one more time. But you asked, like, the first question you asked is kind of like what makes us different than some of the other chains. I think that those differences will become clearer over time, but a lot of the other chains that are this EVM approach, I mean, you take like BSC are kind of forks of like Geth, right? So they've taken Geth, they forked it, and there's interesting things going on, but it's kind of this, it's still kind of the concept is it's a standalone chain. I think the interesting thing about Moonbeam is it is this like kind of from scratch substrate based implementation, and as a parachain, that means that we have this ability to like natively interoperate like with the rest of the Polkadot ecosystem. And so I think that's something that, that's something that we're going to, we're already spending a bunch of time on it, and that's where a lot of our energy is going to go moving forward, is providing these, kind of native integrations. And just to paint a picture of what that looks like. In the beginning, a lot of it's based around like asset movement. That's the key thing that a lot of the partners want, is they want access to assets. And so we would, use this like XCMP protocol to send XCMs to other chains on Polkadot to move assets and then kind of represent them like on Moonbeam, but as ERC20s, as special precompiles. We're heavily using, like, we're going to have like a whole bunch of these precompiles that are, so they basically look like smart contracts from the EVM perspective, but they're actually kind of allow you kind of like access into the underlying substrate runtime to then perform these like cross-chain like actions. And so there's assets first, but we're even working with teams now on like staking functionality. There's teams that want to build like liquid, like staking solutions for like DOT and KSM, for example. So to be able to build that on Moonbeam, but then access like staking functionality on the relay chain. There's a whole bunch of examples like this that I think are things that they don't make sense, or you won't be able to do as just a standalone like blockchain, right? It's because we're part of this larger network that we're able to provide these kinds of integrations.
And yeah, that's definitely one of the benefits of being a sovereign chain, is that you can introduce things such as staking systems, which is quite unique to your parachain. Just really interested to understand your motivations behind creating this staking system, and maybe how you can use that as a competitive advantage against some of these other networks.
Yeah, I mean, well, so and I'll just clarify that, like when I was talking about the staking kind of pre-compiles before, I was actually talking about like relay chain staking. So this is like for people that want to like, have like a, you guys are well aware, like, it may be important to be able to provide like a liquid staking, like asset, like a derivative of like the staked dot, let's say, right? Because a lot of it's staked. But I mean, to your question on staking, like we also have implemented like our own staking system, like on Moonriver and Moonbeam themselves. And so, the question is like, well, why did we do that? And, it gets a little bit nuanced, but, I think what I've heard other people say is that, okay, well, you get this shared security from, the Polkadot, like, from Polkadot itself, from the relay chain, do you need to like, well, how much do you need to do yourself as a parachain then, like in terms of security, right? And so there's this in Polkadot, there's like this role of collator. So a collator is basically responsible for block production. So Polkadot's a little bit unique in this sense that like as a parachain, you have this special node type called a collator. It's producing blocks, but then those produced blocks are kind of like offered up to the relay chain, and then like validators on the relay chain will kind of swoop in and will kind of check the contents of those blocks, right? And say yes, all the logic is correct, the state transitions are correct, and if there's anything that wasn't correct, it gets rejected basically. So you have this kind of like a finality and kind of this like guarantee coming from the relay chain that's providing security. I think the thing that we think is or that that motivated us a bit is to say, yes, that's great that you kind of get this these finality guarantees and this like security checking from the relay chain, but it's still the case that the entities that are like producing blocks still like are in a privileged position, let's call it that way, right? And I think we've seen this on Ethereum these days with all these like MEV discussions that, okay, if you're the person producing blocks, it's like, well, you have an ability to decide what gets in and what doesn't get in, so you can censor. You have an ability to like resequence like the transactions that are in the block, perhaps to your advantage. You have the ability to insert your own transactions, like somewhere in that sequence. So I think that's kind of the way we think about it, is that like that's not really something that we wanted to have in the hands of just like some few privileged people, right? We want like a permissionless system that's kind of open and transparent, where people could kind of come in to perform this block production service and then get protocol kind of compensation for it. So the staking system we've implemented is kind of driving like that, that whole like system and mechanics where people can kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I want to be a collator, and then there's the ability for token holders to kind of delegate and kind of put token weight behind these different collator candidates, and then that'll determine who it is that's actually producing blocks like on our parachain.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think what would be interesting maybe for me also to understand a little bit better, I guess now we have the EVM on the parachain, and how does gas basically work? Is that also kind of used? Is the Moonbeam token being used to pay for gas? Do you have like some interesting model that you're using there? Can you maybe go a bit into that?
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely is part of the compatibility strategy. Like we obviously are kind of also then using the gas systems that exist on Ethereum. There is an underlying token for example on our Moonriver deployment. That's the Mover token that serves kind of the same utility, let's call it, as ETH does on Ethereum, right? So it's kind of used for gas for powering smart contract execution. It does have some other functions as well. It also is used for the staking system I was just talking about. It is also used. We also have are leveraging the whole like on-chain governance system that comes with Substrate. So if anyone's familiar with kind of how that works in the relay chains, we'll have the similar system basically for on-chain governance, which also uses kind of token-weighted referenda and different voting actions and so forth. So those are the kind of sources of utility. And but yeah, I mean, it is a gas system similar to what you find on Ethereum. And we've kind of done this mapping, right? So in Substrate, like the way that you cost things is like via this thing called weights. So like in like a Substrate runtime, you have weights, and we've done kind of a mapping between gas and like these weights, like to come up with a scheme that kind of meets the security like requirements that we have from a like a substrate perspective. We are working on like kind of our version of what EIP 1559 is going to look like. A lot of Ethereum based apps are going to like obviously be adapting like to that, and so we need to kind of also have like our own kind of version of that, which will allow for some dynamic kind of changing of like the block gas limit and other things. But it's not going to be exactly the same because we don't have miners in the same way. So, but we want to again, as part of the compatibility, we have to kind of keep up with what's happening, both on the Polkadot side as well as on the Ethereum side.
Yeah, and maybe I think what's interesting now. Let's say I do this cross-chain deployment. Let's say Compound from Ethereum. I also deploy on Moonbeam. Now my users that want to come there need to have like the Moonbeam token to pay gas. I guess that introduces a bunch of friction. Do you have like any plans to maybe like, is there something to abstract that away for the users, or like should dApps kind of worry about that, or
Yeah, I mean, we have the kind of a lot of the regular kind of Ethereum techniques, like for kind of reducing the friction here, like obviously compatible with our approach too. So that's fiat on ramp partners. That's meta transactions. Economy is like one of our ecosystem partners that can has a very nice meta transaction system for first time users. And then of course the Moonbeam Foundation is pursuing like other kinds of partnerships that would make the this underlying token more available like readily to like end users. But yeah, I mean it is kind of part of the part of the system. Although for a lot of, I would say that the pattern we are seeing is for some dApps that are targeting like non-crypto native users, definitely this like meta transactions I think is kind of like one of the key elements that we see kind of in use there to try to avoid that as being part of like the onboarding process, right? Like at least initially, right? I think that's the thing where you lose a lot of users, like in a traditional user like acquisition flow. It's like if you kind of hit some step and it's like, oh, get tokens, and that's like a whole kind of separate like side odyssey. But that's so I think these are the techniques that we've been seeing people use.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Biconomy so powerful and maybe might get a lot more use in the future, especially for Web3, is that users might not have to worry about sort of gas abstraction. And this, I think, brings more adoption to things like Moonbeam because it allows a more seamless user experience. And so I'm interested, maybe for those listening, the types of Ethereum projects that have integrated with Moonbeam. Have you seen anything cool or interesting, or any future plans for that?
Yeah, I would say that two things come immediately to mind. I mean, I'd say we were relatively unopinionated about this when we started. We said let's go talk to a bunch of people, let's cast a wide net. But there's definitely two areas of concentration. I would say that the primary and the one that's by far the most would be in the DeFi sector. I think a lot of these DeFi protocols, are aggressively pursuing like multi-chain deployment strategies. So that is definitely an area where I would say that's probably the biggest concentration of ecosystem partners we have right now, and that spans across all of the different kind of DeFi building block areas. So regular AMMs, stable swap AMMs, lending and borrowing protocols, stable coins. I'd say so that's kind of been the primary, and that's probably the thing that I'm most bullish on, just because we have this. I think at this point we have like a whole kind of ecosystem of DeFi protocols, and what we're even getting to kind of looking forward. Once even on Moonriver, like once we launch, we're going to be supporting those teams in deployment, and then the Moonbeam Foundation is looking at like running some liquidity bootstrapping programs to like help get activity, kind of get the engines kind of going. But so that's definitely the primary, and we have a bunch of great partners there. Folks like Sushi, Cream, Frax. There's upstarts too. It's not all like these more established players. So Linear Finance is an important partner of ours. Convergence. So we have a number of very strong partners in this area. The second area, though, I would say is like that we're seeing a smaller but growing, kind of set of deployments is in the NFT area. So, that's definitely, I mean, that's just, I guess you can't really escape NFTs these days, right? You'll find those wherever you go. But, we're definitely seeing, activity in that area as well, although, probably to a little bit lesser degree than DeFi. But on the other hand, there's also the lines between these are blurring kind of quite a bit, right? I mean, you look at a lot of these NFT projects and it's kind of a DeFi project, or it's at least leveraging DeFi concepts like in it. So, yeah, even with games too, I feel like a lot of these lines are blurring as people are kind of mixing and matching these different like components in different ways, like to come up with novel combinations, I guess.
Cool. I think, you've explained, I think, everything to our listeners really, really well in terms of Moonbeam and Moonriver even. And I mean, we're really excited to onboard both Moonbeam and Moonriver. And yeah, really excited to see how your network goes in the future. I mean, I think it's going to be really cool. I'm already imagining some bigger Ethereum projects that I use sort of having like a separate page, which will take me to a Moonbeam sort of version of their application. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing some of those integrations come out. And, Felix and I really wanted to thank you for your time today. It means a lot and we really appreciate it. And yeah, if there's anything anywhere that our listeners can find you, maybe on social media, like you yourself and also your project that you would want to mention now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best place would be like, I'd offer the website. So moonbeam.network is kind of the main network website. Moonbeam.foundation is, our foundation's website. And then, we're pretty, active on both Telegram and Discord. I would say, Discord in particular is where the more technical kind of discussions tend to happen. So those would be the places I'd recommend.
All right. Thanks, Derek. Then,
Yeah.
let's wrap up for today. And thanks again for your time. And see you soon on the network.
Thanks for having me. Great question. So thanks very much for having me.
Cheers, Derek.